already texted you this morning, we are going to focus our thoughts on Psalm 90. But before I move on, I would appreciate if the people at the desks there back in charge of the projector could have 2 verses of Psalm 80 for us on one screen so that we can read it responsibly. Psalm 80. I'll read the first verse and you read the second verse. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock, you who are enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth. Restore us, O God, let your face shine, that we may be saved. You have fed them with the bread of tears, and given them tears to drink in full measure. Restore us, O God of hosts, let your face shine, that we may be saved. You cleared the ground for it, it took deep root and filled the land. It sent out branches to the sea and its shoots to the river. The boar from the forest ravages it, and all that move in the field feed on it. The stalk that your right hand planted, and for the son whom you made strong for yourself. But let your hand be on the man of your right hand, the Son of Man whom you have made strong for yourself. Join me in reading the last verse. Restore us, O Lord of hosts, let your face shine, that we may be saved. Praise be to God. Amen. Amen. These days we've been going through the book, third book of the Psalms, most of it composed by Ahaz. Sorry. Help me with the name. Asaph. It's always, most of it is about a national disaster. Maybe the destruction of Jerusalem in 587 or destruction of Samaria in 721. In the light of that destruction or devastation they experienced, the community prays to God for deliverance. Now, in this psalm, we have the theme of restoration. That is what stands out in this psalm. So I would like to focus on the theme of restoration. And that comes as a chorus. Like the songs we sing, we have choruses that repeat, which actually carries the essence of that particular song. This psalm also has a chorus, which is repeated in verse 3, verse 7, and verse 19. And it says, Restore us, O God of hosts, let your face shine, that we may be saved. And the same word, most of you don't know Hebrew, but Hebrew is a beautiful language to learn. This word, return, restore, repent, and that particular word comes again for the 4th time on verse 14 of the same verse, of the same psalm, in another slightly different form, and that is, Turn again, O God of hosts, look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this wine. The Hebrew poet uses the same word in two different forms with almost the same meaning, so that the theme of the psalm is restore. What is restore? Restore is to something returning to its original state. Now, after a brief illness or a long illness, when you have suffered some weight loss or whatever it is, we restore our health back, isn't it? Carefully living and regularizing our exercise and food and other regime, medicine and other things. We work on restoring our health to what it was before the sickness. Or if you had an injury or a fracture or something like that, now you restore your arm or your limb through physiotherapy. Restoring is basically returning to the original state of affairs. Now, the psalmist says there are two things to return. That's amazing thing here. In verse 3, which is repeated in verse 7 and verse 19, the psalmist says, restore us, O God. Restore us. Something has gone wrong with us. Something has gone wrong in our life. Something has gone wrong in the history of our state or the nation. Now, if you read it, if you have read it already, I had sent the note today morning. If you found time, now they are talking about, they're lamenting about a national disaster. A national disaster where the city was destroyed, their temple was pulled down, and a lot of their people were killed, a lot of people were taken as prisoners, probably died on the way to their exile, and there's a lot of children were separated from mothers, husbands were separated from fathers, wives, and quite a lot of catastrophe. But in the midst of that, they ask two things. Number one, they say, restore us, O God. And then the Hebrew writer, you have to read it in Hebrew in order to understand the real punchline, the punch of that punchline actually. And he says, return, O God. The same word, it's the same word, but it's translated two different words here. God, you restore us. And the people pray, you restore yourself to us. Restore us to yourself, and you restore yourself to us. We have lost you. In the midst of all this confusion and all these calamities that has fallen on us, we have lost ourselves. We have lost you also in our life. And we want it to be restored. Coming back, turn back. That is the punch of this psalm. And then they goes on with their complaint. They say, what has happened? Who is their God? Their God is the God who is the shepherd of Israel. I'll be dwelling on that theme soon. And they say, you are the great God who dwells on or enthroned God. That was kept in the Jerusalem temple. Earlier than that, it was kept in the tabernacle. Two birds covering a box. And they believed that is the throne of God. God is seated on that. And in war times, they will take this in a procession to the war front. And the God leads them. It goes in the front and they follow him and they will win the war. Because the Lord of hosts, read hosts as armies. The Lord of the armies leads the war to victory. But now, in spite of all that, God has left them, abandoned them. So the prayer is, oh Lord, the relationship is broken. Now we want it to be restored. Now what then they go on metaphorically, using metaphors, two basic metaphors. One is the wine. In Psalm 40 verse 14 and 15, Now, in this verse, these two metaphors are combined. Let me read that again to you. That is Psalm 80, verses 14 to 15. Turn again, O God of hosts, look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the stock that your hand has planted, the son whom you have made strong for yourself. And that's the vine. And then they said, you are, in the opening verse, they say, you are the God who is the shepherd of Israel. The vine. Now let me come to this vine. Psalm 80, verses 7 to 11. In 5 verses, all these weeks I have been telling you the history of Israel. These Psalms by Asaph, he retells the story of Israel that every Sunday school child might have learned in his or her life. But I know that most of you sitting here haven't been to any Sunday school, so you missed that experience. I'm sorry for you. But you can catch up definitely. Some of you came to the Lord, started reading the Bible maybe at 25 or 30 or even later. So you have missed that story of the Bible, God's great redemption in history. But now the psalmist in the book of Psalm Asaph, he will tell the story in different ways. We already heard it many times. Now here, the psalmist tells a story in the form of a parable. And that is what we see in verses 7 to 11. Let me read it for you. It will be on the screen as well for you to read yourself. Restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved. And they say, look, you brought a wine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations. So when you brought a wine out of Egypt, that sentence summarizes the 40 chapters of the book of Exodus. Up to Deuteronomy. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. You drove out the nations and planted it. That summarizes the entire book of Joshua. You cleared the ground for it, and it took deep root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, and the mighty cedars with its branches. And that covers 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings. And its roots to the river. That's what the whole history of Israel is summarized there. God delivered the slaves from Egypt by his mighty arm, by the great miracles, led them through the Red Sea, crossed the Red Sea on the dry ground, then entered the wilderness, and there and later on they defeated the nations before them, who opposed them, and they took the land, and they flourished in the land under the leadership of Joshua. And then God gave them the kings, and they flourished again. During the days of David, the great king, they became an empire. Even the present Hashemite kingdom of Jordan and parts of Saudi Arabia in the southern part, and what is now Syria and Lebanon and Damascus, so that area, Libya and Syria, present Syria, all these were under, and many islands in the Mediterranean Sea were part of their empire. But came 721, to put it very simply. They just was devastated by the Assyrians. The northern kingdom went into exile. 597 came. Nebuchadnezzar's army came and attacked them. 10 years later, he came and destroyed their temple. 4 years later, and many other things happened also. And they ceased to be a nation. Now, but it all begins with, he says, you took a wine out of Egypt. Have you ever bought anything from a plant from a nursery and tried to plant it in your garden? If you have a garden, many of us don't have the luxury now, the luxury here in the city, but you might have potted it at least on your terrace, on your deck. Maybe you live in the 11th floor, you still love for plants, you have a love for plants. And then you planted it, cared for it, it grew, and my neighbor has a fruit tree. He loves the plants. So he has planted a tree. in my society, the next door neighbor, and he want to see fruits. Small tree, you can get miniature trees nowadays, fruit trees, which you can grow on a pot. And they are pouring water, they are caring for it, they add manure and all that. You know, the love that goes into that, only those who love plants, those who have planted things, know the love that we invest, the care we invest in the plant. Yesterday, a dear friend of mine was on the phone, and we were talking about various other things. And I told him, tell your wife Sopna, because we exchange plants with each other. I said, tell her that her CZ plant is dying in my pot. And for him, he doesn't like plants. This is wife's passion. He didn't understand. He thought someone is dying in my family. It is true. That plant, which I brought from Kochi, is not thriving. It is sort of a regressive thing. And it is dying. But because I love it, because it is my plant, I don't care if your expensive plant dies. But my plant dying is something very different for me. They were oppressed in Egypt. They were working in the brick kilns, and they were underfed. They were flogged. For 400 years, most of that 400 years, their Egyptian life was an oppressive life. And then in Exodus chapter 3, God told Moses, I have heard the cry of my people. I am going to deliver them. A promise that I have kept postponing for probably 440 years or so, or roughly like that. I am going to fulfill it. And he released them by his mighty arm. And he gave them a beautiful land. And they became a prominent nation. That is what they want to be restored back to. They want to be restored back to that state where the king of the universe took them as a weak plant and planted it in this land, clearing all the ground and watered it. Now this psalm has a parallel in Isaiah chapter 5 verses 1 to 11. You can read it back at home. They may look like twins. Isaiah chapter 5 verses 1 to 11. And these psalms are parallels, almost parallels. The care it has taken. But now they say, Lord, restore us back to that relationship that we once enjoyed. Let's get back to that relationship. When you carried a plant all the way from Egypt to this land and planted it. You know, since I don't have a green thumb. I don't know what type of thumb. Only my plants can say that. But as a person who loves trees and plants, I know the intimacy you develop with these inanimate objects. Your pastor is not a very upright person. Your pastor once did a theft, but never fought for that theft. I uprooted an olive sapling from Galilee and smuggled it against Indian law to India and planted it in a pot, and it is sort of surviving in my house now. It was a serious crime, isn't it? Smuggling an olive sapling, and if you want to see that olive sapling, you can have it for a fee anytime you after service. My plant, because I love it. It's my plant. That's a type of relationship that they enjoyed once. But now what happened, Lord? You have sent the enemies against us. They have come to your city. They have destroyed your temple. What went wrong? Restore us, O Lord. You know, what a beautiful cry. It's not a beautiful cry. It's a very serious cry. They say, restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine, O God, that we may be saved. Every relationship, you know, here is a story of oppression to blessing. They were oppressed, now they have become a blessing. They became a blessing to many nations, many countries, many people. The Moabites and all these people were blessed. Under its shade, they had protection. Many lives, some of you may have a similar story to tell me. It's a story of God moving people from oppression to blessing. Joyce Meyer, her name is a household name nowadays. Any Christian household and even non-Christian households, they watch her on television. We may not agree with everything she says, and I'm not even recommending that you should watch her regularly, especially on Sunday morning. You should be in the church. Joyce Meyer, as a teenager, her father repeatedly raped her. The father who gave her birth raped her. And she grew up with that abuse, psychological problem, depression, sense of shame. That is Joyce Meyer's life. But now Joyce Meyer is not living in depression. Joyce Meyer, as a preacher of the Word of God, is not living in depression. Her heart was wounded. Her life was completely damaged. From that broken pieces, from that heap of ashes, she came out of that beautifully, as we sang this morning. Make something beautiful out of me, O Lord. And that really happened. She was broken. From that brokenness, God put all the pieces together and made something beautiful for him out of that ashes and from that broken pieces. But there's another story. Joyce Meyer's story ends there. But there are many such lives devastated by abuse, devastated by sickness, devastated by poverty, devastated by neglect, put together by God. But later they went back to that devastation from which they came out. They went back to that ashes from which God built them. And if there are such lives, these lives should pray this prayer: restore us, O Lord. Let your light shine upon us. You may not have a dramatic experience like Joyce Meyer's experience, or many Christian biographies you read or might have read. But don't you think that in a small measure that your life and my life is a life that moved from oppression, negativities to something beautiful for God? But where are you now? Where am I now? Am I on a way returning to that old ashes? Am I returning to the beautiful ways was for God now? Am I returning to my brokenness now? Or am I making a move forward? If you are retracing your steps back to slavery, if you ever have a tendency to go back to that by sloth, mediocrity, and whatever is hampering your spiritual progress, this is the prayer that you should pray, and that's the prayer I should pray. Restore us, O God. Let your face shine upon us. Amen. Restore. This psalm is also a communal psalm. This morning, as I was continuing to, I had a big struggle with this psalm, definitely. I could not make sense of it. Yesterday night I didn't sleep properly because I was thinking about this and other thoughts invading me. And in the morning I was in a desperate situation to try to put pieces together for this psalm. Restore us, O God of hosts, let your face shine, that we may be saved. That's the repeated prayer. Then he uses another metaphor. He says, Lord, you are the shepherd of Israel, then we are the sheep. He says, restore your sheep, O God. Please restore the sheep. Sometimes, I don't know whether this happens really or not, in real life or not. The sheep leaves goes from the master and gets shattered. Here is the image of the shepherd abandoning the sheep altogether. And now the sheep cries, restore us, please, come back. Please restore us and put us all together. We are all scattered all over the place. In my little village back in Kerala, after the harvest is over, I think almost this season, I think, there's been ages since I ever went back during this season. The harvest is over and the paddy fields, there is some grain and some water and all that. The duck farmers come, they bring their ducks in trucks and they let them feed on whatever is left there. Huge truck, duck farmers. And we see the duck all over the place. And what happens is that one or two, there may be some geese also among them. They get scattered. But imagine a situation when this duck farmer, having brought the duck and left the ducks and left them on it, and he simply goes. He abandons them. What will the ducks do? There is nobody to gather them back at night to the little pen he makes in the field. He makes a little pen, and in the evening the ducks are free to roam around wherever they want. But then he will bring them back to this little pen and sleeps by the side of it. It's a beautiful scene. I grew up seeing such scene. And then in the morning he collects all the eggs and then let them go again. The duck farmers, the sheep farmers, the duck enjoys the protection that the shepherd enjoys. That is the shepherd, the relationship that we have. The book of Isaiah, I am going to read a few verses to help you understand our relationship with God. First of all, I should read Genesis 48, 15 to 16. Jacob, you know the story of Jacob. At least the men know, a few men who are attending the men's fellowship. We already had a character Bible study on that. In fact, who did Jacob? Joji, the character study on Jacob, or we are yet to do it? Who? Philly. You did study on Jacob? Yeah, he did the study on Jacob. If I remember, he also said he did it. So I have no reason to doubt it. Now, this man called Jacob was as sly as a fox, one stage of his life, ran away from home, cheated his, probably you can put all these negative things about him, sort of partly true as well, cheated his uncle, ran away with his property, struggled in life. His life was threatened and he was in danger many times. Finally, he had to fight with an angel of God. But as he was approaching his death, he says this beautiful verse. He says in verse 15 of 48, the God before whom, he sums up his entire life. The life, a few days, maybe a few months before he died, he says this. The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. The God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day. The Lord who was my shepherd. Who is saying that? A man who was a shepherd for his whole entire life. He has born as a shepherd's son and is going to die as the ancestor of the shepherds. Finally, he sums up and he says, yes, I've been a shepherd of the sheep, literally, but I have a shepherd. I had a shepherd. From my young life, my birth to this point in my life in Egypt, where I am about to die, I'm just blessing my children before I close my eyes. my last breath, he says, God is my shepherd. And Isaiah says the same thing in a slightly different way. Isaiah chapter 40 verse 11. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. That's the image of God we have. That doesn't end in Old Testament. We see that in the book of Hebrews. As the writer of the book of Hebrews closes his big treatise, his sermon script or in the epistle, the letter he wrote, finally he closes with these words of benediction. Hebrews chapter 13 verses 20 to 21. Now, may the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus Christ, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant, equip you with everything good that you may do his will, working in us that which is pleasing in his sight, through Jesus Christ, to whom be glory forever and ever. I remember a few years back, maybe a few months back, now we're doing a series on the Hebrews, a book written for a persecuted church, a church where many of their members lost their property because of their faith. The property was confiscated. They were thrown into the jail. They were gone through immense persecution for their faith. But to that congregation, the writer says, the great shepherd of the sheep, in the midst of all the problems that you go through, in the midst of all the losses you had to make, or you had to suffer, you are in the arms of a great shepherd. Praise be to God. You have to imagine Christian life that way. But something has gone wrong. The shepherd has left the sheep. The sheep are scattered. Many of them are slaughtered. So they pray, restore us, O God. Please. Please take us back. Don't abandon us. Now, that beautiful relationship is one of the profound mysteries of the Christian spirituality or the Bible. Let me ask you this question. With due respect to all my brothers and sisters who belong to other faiths, other religious traditions, have you ever come across a God in any religion taking care of the sheep or any animal? There are two, the God and the animals relationship in all the religions that we can imagine have two roles. One, the animal is a bhakta, a devotee. You will see such iconography, idols. The God is seated somewhere, and the animal may be an elephant, or maybe a cow, like Nandi, or it could be a rat, in the case of Ganesh, but it is worshipping the idol. That is the religious imagination. But here is a religious reality in the Bible where God takes the animal, the shepherd, in his hands, cares for it, loves it, protects it. That is our relationship with our God. It is not something to ride on. The lamb, the sheep, is not something on which the God rides on, or something that sits or at the feet of the God. It is something that God carries. That's the privilege we have. Peter puts it in a beautiful way in 1 Peter 2:25. You were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. He has oversight over my soul. That's a relationship. But at times what happens is that the sheep thinks it is self-sufficient. The sheep may think that it can do it all by itself, like the lost sheep. Sometimes the sheep venture out on its own, get into misadventures and loss. But when the sheep realizes that my relationship with Jesus is not as it was in my beginning, I have lost my first love, then comes this prayer, restore me, O God. Restore me, O God. Let your face shine upon me. Now, let me add a little more, another thing here. Restoration is an act of God. It is not a self-effort. That is, bringing us back to God is the work of God. Unless God does that, it will never happen. That's what the psalmist realizes. Asaph realizes that unless God takes an initiative, it can't happen. But God will do that, provided we cry for that. God, bring me back to that intimacy that you have. I'm a plant, I'm a vine, you took me out of Egypt, you cleared the land, and you planted me here, and you blessed me, O Lord, and from my fruit, many people are blessed. On my branches, many birds have come and found rest. Under my shade, the wild beasts were able to rest under this, and this has covered the whole world. That's the way I was as a nation. But now it's devastated. Its branches are cut off. Enemy has entered your sanctuary, and I am in a pitiable condition. Restore me, O Lord, and let your face shine upon me. That is what restoration is. Coming back to a former state of spiritual union with God. Now the second thing, or whatever it is, third or fourth, whichever it may be. The second thing to be restored is God. God has to restore me, the vine. God has to restore me, the sheep. Now, the psalmist says, God, please come back. The same word, but in a slightly different nuance, or slightly different meaning, shade of meaning. The same Hebrew word, shuv, is used. He says, return, O God, please, return. Verse 14 and 15. Let me read it for you. Turn again, O God. Restore yourself. Come back. Look down from heaven, please. Have regard for this vine, the stalk that your hand planted, and for the son whom you made strong for yourself. Have you ever tried, if you had a grandchild or a small kid, some of you have kids and some of us have grandkids, whichever way, the child has to be small. As you walk away from the child in a busy mall, or in a fair, or even in a railway station, as you walk away from that child, and the child is probably sitting in a stroller, it can't move itself on its own. It is limited or restrained in a stroller. And you are walking away from the child. It will be crying, come back, please. Come back. I feel insecure, God, without you. You are walking away from me. You have devastated this because of our sins. You have done something, damaged this because we have gone away from you. We have not honored you. I have done something terribly wrong, and I deserve this. But God, don't walk away from my life. Return, O God. That is the third or second prayer to God. You feel God walking away in your life? Ever? Yes. Sometimes that happens. Because when God has no business in our life, what else should God do? When we come to an arrogance, when we think that we can do everything and no place for God, what else will God do? Walk away. That's already the only option left for him. Is my life and your life a life where God has no place and he simply walks away? like a railway porter. He had come to help you. But you are trying to carry all the burdens by yourself. Burdens that you cannot lift. And then he looks at it and say, oh, this guy will manage it. He don't need me. He will look for another customer. He will just walk away. Just like that. God might have walked away from your life because you managed your life. I managed my life on my own, did not give God any place in my life. And if that's the case, here is the prayer. In verses 14 and 15, return, O God. Return, O God. Turn again, O God of hosts. Look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, please, the stalk that your right hand planted, and for the son of whom you have made strongest. Now what happens when that restoration happens? When restoration happens, the psalmist here again says, his face will shine upon us. Now you can only see the back of God, because God is walking away from our lives. He's going away because he says, there is nothing I can do in this life. It's a self-sufficient life, arrogant life, who's just simply managing their life on their own. There's no need for me. They don't pray. They think that everything is in my control, and God walks away from that life. And all that he can see is the back of the person, the God. Now psalmist prays, please turn around. Let your face shine upon us. And that's a very powerful metaphor. What happens? This face shining or light from God's face is a very, very powerful metaphor in the Bible. Psalmist says, another psalmist, in Psalm 104 verse 29, he says, when God hides his face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. Psalmist says, when God hides his face from the creatures, the animals he created, who look to them for their food every season, when he turns his face, they simply die. His face is what gives life to the creation. He is looking down from heaven. The moment he takes his gaze away from us, we are nobody. We die. Now, one of the blessings in the Jewish religion, actually in the Bible, is Numbers 6, 24 to 26. When the priest blesses the people, he says this, the Lord bless you and keep you. Sometimes I also say this as a shepherd of the flock. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Today afternoon we are going to visit the synagogue. I think they say this benediction in the synagogue worship. The blessing that a person can receive is this from God. The priest will do that. The Lord bless you and keep you. And the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. And we are that community whom God favors. Restore us, O God, let your face shine upon us. Brothers and sisters, I want to close with this thought. Is there a longing for a restoration? Returning to God. Give him in the right place in your life. Giving him the due place that is due. Not a God of gaps. God of gaps is you do all that you can do yourself and give to God things you think God can do, only do. That is the thing. Now you manage all your life and plan everything and do everything, execute everything, but God has no place. And things which are impossible, problematic, you hand over to God. You take care of it. That is a belief, the spirituality of God of the gaps. Only when there is a gap, there is a space for God. Otherwise, we can manage. We need to be restored from that. I have a vision for the church. This morning also when I prayed, I realized that many times my own preaching, like the preaching of many pastors these days, is individualistic. Now what is meant by individualistic? That is preaching to the individual needs. And I have made that mistake. Like many people do that. But God convicted me of that. That is, I'm not able to see the forest, the wood, for the trees. You know, that experience. You have trees, you focus on the trees, and you miss the forest, the beauty of the forest. But why I'm saying that is, you're theirs, but as a church, we need to be restored. As a church, we need to be restored to its former glory or the glory that God has intended. I'm simply saying this, that not only individual lives, but as a congregation, as a planting of God, as a vineyard of Jesus Christ, as a sheep of the great shepherd and overseer of our souls, we as a church has to return to God. I would like to see a good choir, all those who have voices, able to sing, singing for the glory of God. All those who can do something in the church, something for God through the church, doing it for God. And as a group of people, as a body of people, as a body of Christ, we stand together for the blessing of this nation. I see this prophetically. I see that we will impact this nation. We are beginning to do that. But that only can happen as all of us fall on our knees and cry this prayer. Restore us, O God. Let your face shine upon us. This sermon is for every individual. This sermon is also for the entire church. In 2 years, 3 or 4 weeks' time, we'll be celebrating our 13th anniversary. And as the founding pastor of this church, the person responsible for its failures and what it is now, I am going through a serious spiritual introspection, whether I have done what the Lord has asked me to do. I have four more weeks to continue it. Have I done for you and for God what He has entrusted me to do? I'm going through that introspection as I prepare for 14th of April. But God is convicting me that we have to be restored. People has to be reinstated. Ministries have to be, gifts, talents has to be released. There has to be a tremendous freedom in our spiritual life. And then we will worship the Lord who is seated, enthroned on the cherubim. Praise be to His name. Will you please stand up as we worship the Lord?